The allegation in Iran is that the Iranian Revolutionary Guards are part and parcel of this. On the Pakistani side, it's the Frontier Corps, which is the paramilitary organization charged with manning the border, that they are involved.
How does an oil-rich nation like Iran spiral into economic disaster? The answer starts with Israeli precision strikes on Iranian oil storage facilities and the South Pass natural gas field, critical infrastructure that formed the backbone of Iran's economy. In the aftermath, the Iranian rial lost 10 times its value by mid-2025, with $1 trading for over 700,000 rials on the black market. This is the untold story of how Iran's economic lifeline was shattered, triggering a chain reaction of rampant poverty, soaring inflation, and a surge in organized smuggling. The impact of these strikes reaches far beyond the oil fields, setting off a crisis that now threatens the entire nation. At the heart of Iran's economic collapse lies a single, devastating event. Israeli precision strikes on oil storage facilities and key natural gas fields. These attacks landed at the worst possible moment. Iran's budget for 2024 assumed oil would sell at $80 per barrel, but actual prices hovered between $70 and $75. This gap had already strained government finances. When the strikes hit, they didn't just damage infrastructure. They immediately slashed export capacity and revenue. Iran, pumping 3.2 million barrels per day, saw billions evaporate from its projected $20 billion in oil earnings for 2024 to 2025. The fiscal deficit widened overnight with no easy path to recovery. These facilities, critical to the nation's financial stability, cannot be quickly or cheaply restored. Repairing them requires resources the government simply does not possess, especially with sanctions already choking off outside investment. The ripple effect was immediate and severe. Oil and gas are the backbone of Iran's economy, accounting for the majority of its foreign currency income. Most of these exports go to China, but even that lifeline frays when production falters. The strikes didn't just limit the flow of oil, they undermined international confidence in Iran's ability to deliver. State media vowed quick repairs, but weeks later, some facilities remained offline. This public failure exposed regime vulnerabilities and eroded the government's claims of resilience. Each day of lost production translated directly into fewer dollars entering the country, deepening the budget shortfall and forcing the government to make harsh decisions. With nearly half the national budget allocated to subsidies, the shortfall from oil revenues forced drastic cuts. Essential services like healthcare and education, heavily dependent on government funding, suffered first. Hospitals faced shortages of medicine and equipment. Schools struggled to pay staff or maintain basic operations. The government's ability to subsidize fuel and food diminished, destabilizing supply chains and making everyday necessities harder to access. As imported goods became scarcer, inflation accelerated. For ordinary Iranians, the consequences were immediate. Food, medicine, and electricity grew less affordable by the week. Over 30 million people now live below the poverty line, their daily existence shaped by the economic crisis. The strikes have also reshaped the political landscape. Public anger intensified as shortages became visible. Empty shelves, fuel lines stretching for blocks, and blackouts in major cities. Iranians increasingly blamed the government for failing to protect vital resources and restore damaged infrastructure. The regime's credibility suffered further as promises of rapid recovery went unfulfilled. The gap between official statements and the reality on the ground became a source of widespread frustration and protest. The strikes did not merely inflict physical damage, they highlighted the fragility of a system built on a single revenue stream. Historically, oil revenue allowed Iran to weather internal dysfunction and external pressure. but the strikes shattered this buffer. With no significant diversification into other sectors like manufacturing or agriculture, the economy lacked alternatives. Each day that production lagged, the government's debt grew and public spending shrank. Subsidized goods, essential for maintaining social stability, became scarce, sometimes acquiring black market status. Protests erupted in cities and rural areas alike, driven by desperation and a sense that the state could no longer deliver on its basic promises. Debt financing increased as the government scrambled to cover deficits, further weakening the rial and fueling inflation. Public services deteriorated rapidly. Hospitals closed wards, schools shortened hours, and public transportation networks broke down. The humanitarian crisis deepened as families lost access to care, education, and reliable infrastructure. Small businesses collapsed under rising costs and supply disruptions. The sense of economic security that oil once provided was replaced by uncertainty and fear. The strikes were brief, but their consequences are long-lasting. Every dollar lost compounds the challenges ahead: more debt, a weaker currency, and rising prices. The government's inability to restore stability has eroded public trust. For many Iranians, daily life now revolves around coping with shortages and navigating a landscape where prices can change overnight. This relentless inflation is the next and perhaps most punishing chapter in the crisis. Across Iran, the struggle to afford life's basics has become a defining reality. Runaway inflation, triggered by a collapsing currency and government missteps, has transformed daily routines into a series of hard choices. Between 2018 and mid-2025, the rial plunged from 70,000 to over 700,000 per US dollar. This tenfold collapse has made every purchase unpredictable. Prices for bread, rice, and cooking oil have soared by more than 50% since 2023, according to official data. What was once a simple trip to the market now forces families to ration staples, skip meals, and debate which necessities can be sacrificed to make ends meet. The roots of this crisis lie in the central bank of Iran's decision to print more money as oil revenues dried up. Intended as a stopgap for budget shortfalls, this policy only accelerated inflation. The surging money supply eroded confidence in the rial, and with each new round of currency issued, the value of people's savings shrank further. Ordinary Iranians watched as their paychecks and pensions lost purchasing power almost overnight. The impact rippled through every transaction, from grocery stores to rent payments, making it nearly impossible for incomes to keep pace with rising costs. For a growing number of households, the cost of basic food items now exceeds their monthly earnings. Families in Tehran and provincial cities alike report skipping meals to conserve what little they have. In many homes, parents quietly go without so their children can eat. The price of bread, once a reliable staple, is now a source of anxiety. Cooking oil, rice, and other essentials have become luxury items for many. This erosion of living standards is not limited to the poorest segments. Even middle-class families are forced to cut back, sell possessions, or borrow money to survive. The economic pain extends well beyond the dinner table. Iran's once proud auto industry, for example, production plummeted from 1.4 million vehicles in 2011 to just 1 million in 2024. Factory closures in cities like Tabriz mirror a broader trend. Parts imports are blocked, assembly lines idle, and skilled workers laid off. This loss of industrial output has left thousands without work, compounding the strain on communities already struggling to cope with rising prices. Unemployment figures reveal the depth of the crisis. While the headline rate sits at 10%, true youth unemployment ranges from 30% to 42%, with young women hardest hit. For those under 30, the chances of finding stable, formal work are slim. Many are forced into informal or precarious jobs, street vending, day labour, or unregulated service work, where wages are low and protections non-existent. The lack of opportunity feeds a sense of frustration and hopelessness among the country's younger generation, who see little prospect for improvement. As formal employment dries up, the informal economy expands to fill the void. Small businesses, cafes and shops in cities like Isfahan struggle as consumer spending evaporates. In rural areas, farmers face rising costs for fertilizer and machinery, with some abandoning their fields altogether. The private sector, hindered by red tape and limited access to credit, cannot absorb the growing ranks of the unemployed. For many, the only option is to participate in cash-based or black market transactions, where goods are available but often at steep markups. This shift to informal markets comes at a cost. Products in these shadow economies frequently carry inflated prices, further eroding the purchasing power of those already struggling. Trust in the government's ability to manage the crisis has faded. Each new round of price hikes, every factory closure, and each broken promise deepens public disillusionment. Protests flare in response, but official reactions alternate between denial and repression, leaving little hope for meaningful change. The consequences of runaway inflation reach every corner of Iranian society, driving families to the margins and forcing new patterns of survival. As the formal economy falters, a parallel system grows in its place, one that operates outside official oversight and creates new risks for those who depend on it. This emerging shadow economy is now a crucial, if precarious, part of daily life for millions. Iran's black market, a $10 billion shadow industry, has become a defining force in the country's economic landscape. Smugglers ring up over $10 billion annually by moving subsidized fuel, medicine, and baby formula across borders, exploiting gaps created by sanctions and government policy failures. This underground network is not just a byproduct of hardship. Among the cheapest in the world due to heavy subsidies, is siphoned off and transported primarily to Pakistan. In border towns like Zahedan, trucks loaded with jerry cans routinely bypass checkpoints, highlighting both the scale and impunity of these operations. The profits are significant, but the cost to ordinary Iranians is high. Subsidized fuel that should support local transportation and industry instead vanishes into cross-border pipelines. Residents in urban and rural areas alike report empty gas stations and rising local prices, as subsidized supplies are diverted for illicit gain. The black market's reach extends to essential goods well beyond fuel. Medicine and baby formula, often scarce in official channels due to sanctions and supply disruptions, are smuggled across borders to Iraq and Turkey. This trade is managed by organized networks with links to powerful elites, who profit while families struggle to find insulin or cooking oil on store shelves. For many, the disappearance of everyday necessities is a daily reminder of a system that fails to protect the vulnerable. Parents searching for basic medications are forced to turn to underground dealers, paying inflated prices or settling for lower quality substitutes. The health consequences are immediate, with shortages of critical drugs leading to preventable complications and deaths. The informal economy, street vendors, unregistered taxis, small traders, offers a precarious lifeline for those excluded from formal employment. Jobs in this sector are unstable, with incomes fluctuating and no safety net. Yet, for millions, it is the only way to survive as the official economy contracts. The expansion of the shadow economy, while providing short-term relief, perpetuates broader instability. Inflation accelerates as black market prices spill over into formal markets, and the government's ability to implement economic reforms is further undermined. Corruption and inequality are both a cause and a consequence of the black market's dominance. Those with access to subsidized goods or official currency rates profit at the expense of the broader population. The gap between rich and poor widens as well-connected actors grow wealthier, while ordinary citizens face scarcity and rising costs. Social resentment builds, especially as stories circulate of elites benefiting from smuggling networks, while the majority struggles to afford basic necessities. Attempts by the government to control the black market have proven largely ineffective. Crackdowns target small-scale operators, while entrenched networks with political protection continue to operate with impunity. Border controls remain porous, and periodic interventions do little to address the systemic drivers of illicit trade. The presence of a thriving underground economy undermines official policy, fuels inflation, and deepens distrust in state institutions. For many Iranians, the black market is not a choice, but a necessity, a response to shortages and uncertainty. Yet its continued growth signals deeper structural problems: over-reliance on oil, lack of economic diversification, and persistent corruption. As the shadow economy expands, it draws more people into its orbit, making recovery and reform even more difficult. The search for alternatives continues. In recent years, some have turned to digital currencies, hoping for a way around sanctions and economic isolation. But this new lifeline brings its own set of risks and complications, raising questions about whether technology can offer real relief or simply add another layer of uncertainty to an already unstable landscape. Cryptocurrency has emerged as both a tool and a risk in Iran's ongoing economic crisis. By mid-2024, Iranians had processed over $1 billion in crypto trades, chiefly with Turkey and China, effectively bypassing swift restrictions and allowing sanctioned businesses to maintain a lifeline to the outside world. This shift was not accidental. It was a calculated response to years of financial isolation, with policymakers in Tehran embracing digital currencies as a workaround to global banking barriers. The government's commitment to this strategy became clear in 2019, when cryptocurrency mining was legalized. Iran's low electricity costs made it a magnet for large-scale mining operations, which quickly proliferated across the country. Powerful rigs, often operated by state-linked companies or affluent traders, began consuming vast amounts of energy to generate digital coins. On paper, these efforts promised a new revenue stream and a means to sustain imports and exports otherwise blocked by sanctions. In practice, however, the reality proved more complicated. Crypto mining's appetite for power has placed enormous strain on Iran's already fragile energy infrastructure. Mining operations now consume an estimated 10% of the nation's electricity. In 2024, large-scale mining operations triggered power cuts lasting days in cities like Mashhad, leaving hospitals and schools in the dark. These blackouts did not just inconvenience households, they disrupted critical services, closed factories, and deepened public frustration. For ordinary Iranians, the promise of technological innovation translated into spoiled food, shuttered businesses, and children unable to study, all while the benefits of mining remained out of reach. The structure of Iran's crypto sector has only reinforced existing inequalities. The costs of entry, expensive hardware, access to cheap electricity, and the technical knowledge required ensure that the primary beneficiaries are state-linked enterprises and wealthy private operators. Most citizens, already struggling with inflation and job losses, cannot afford to participate. For them, the crypto boom is another example of an economy where opportunity is reserved for a privileged minority, while the burdens, like blackouts and rising costs, are shared by all. Volatility in the global cryptocurrency market adds further risk. In the previous year, a significant price crash wiped out $200 million in Iranian crypto holdings, underscoring the instability inherent in relying on digital assets. Tehran's response has been forceful. The government has shut down hundreds of illegal mines and arrested unlicensed miners, acknowledging that crypto is a double-edged sword, not a mass remedy. These crackdowns are intended to assert control, but they also highlight the government's limited ability to manage the unpredictable forces unleashed by digital currencies. Despite these setbacks, some merchants and traders still see value in using cryptocurrency to facilitate cross-border transactions. For a small segment of the population, digital assets provide a way to move money, pay for imports, or shield savings from the worst effects of inflation and currency devaluation. Yet for the vast majority, crypto remains inaccessible, another system that promises mobility but delivers little relief. The unintended consequences of Iran's crypto experiment are apparent. The strain on the power grid, the deepening of social inequality, and the exposure to market volatility all reflect the costs of relying on digital currencies as an economic lifeline. The government's attempts to regulate and control the sector have done little to address these underlying problems. Instead, cryptocurrency has become both a symptom and a cause of the broader economic instability that defines daily life for millions of Iranians. As the country faces persistent shortages, rising prices, and eroding public services, the turn to cryptocurrency underscores the desperate measures now shaping Iran's economy. The technology offers brief opportunities for some, but for most, it is a reminder of how far the nation has drifted from stability. The human impact of these policies, and the choices made by those in power, becomes clearer with each blackout and every lost job. In the end, the story of cryptocurrency in Iran is not just about innovation or survival. It is about the widening gap between those who benefit and those left behind, and the mounting costs of a system under strain. Iran's economic collapse is not just a crisis of numbers. It is the breakdown of a nation's ability to sustain its population. Over 30 million Iranians now live below the poverty line. Without reform, hyperinflation and unrest could explode by 2026. Geopolitical pressures and decades of internal corruption have left the currency unstable and public services in decline. While reforms, such as cutting subsidies, fighting corruption, and diversifying into petrochemicals, agriculture, and tourism are discussed, they face significant political and structural obstacles. The consequences reach far beyond Iran's borders. Disruptions in the Strait of Hormuz, where 20% of the world's oil passes, show how local crises can quickly alter global energy prices and regional security dynamics. If you found this analysis enlightening, subscribe and hit the bell. Understanding Iran's plight is crucial to grasping wider regional security risks.